เรื่องร่างรัฐธรรมนูญนะคะก็สวัสดีวันศุกร์แล้วก็ขอต้อนรับทุกท่านเข้าสู่งานสุดสัปดาห์สิ่งแวดล้อมแม่น้ำโขงอาเซียน 2563 นะคะสิ่งแวดล้อมประชาธิปไตยและชีวิตที่โยงใหญ่กันในภูมิภาคนะคะก็ตื่นเต้นเล็กน้อยค่ะวันนี้ก็รับหน้าที่มาเป็นผู้ดำเนินรายการประจำวันนะคะก็งานจะมีทั้งหมด3วันนะคะวันที่25ถึงวันที่27กันยายน 2563 นะคะณห้องเพื่อนหอศิลป์กรุงเทพตื่นเต้นเล็กน้อย ชั้น6นะคะหอศิลปวัฒนธรรมแห่งกรุงเทพมหานครนะคะก็เมื่อครู่มี
สวัสดีนะคะสำหรับเดินทางมานะคะ
Good morning everyone I'd like toแม่โขงอาเซียน 2563 นะคะสิ่งแวดล้อม
Environmental Week
และชีวิตที่โยงใยกันในภูมิภาค
Environment Democracy
ระหว่างวันที่ 25 ถึง 27 กันยายน 2563 นี้นะคะที่ห้องเพื่อนหอศิลปะกรุงเทพชั้น 6 หอศิลปวัฒนธรรมกรุงเทพมหานครนะคะสำหรับท่านที่ดูผ่านที่ไม่ได้มาร่วมที่นี่นะคะแล้วก็หรือคนที่ลงทะเบียนแล้วแล้วก็กำลังเดินทางมาก็สามารถนั่งรถ BTS
actually attend in person here, taking the BTS to National Stadium and walk over to the BACC. And you have to take the elevator up to the 5th floor and then walk up the stairs onto the 6th floor. So I hope that you will not miss it. But if you have not registered, we are live streaming this event through Facebook, MAEW 2020. So if you cannot attend in person, you can also watch the video online. For those who cannot come here, and all this 3 days event contain seminars as well as documentary film viewing, and we have 4 sessions today from the morning. Partly it's also an exhibition on photographs of the environmental activists who have faced violence by the state, and we also have other photographs of the นิทรรศการแล้วก็ในส่วนของเสวนาก็จะมีการมีหนังสั้นมีสารคดีแล้วก็มีพูดเรื่องภาพถ่ายที่เกิดขึ้นว่าด้วยโครงการพัฒนาในภูมิภาคอาเซียนแล้วก็ในประเทศไทยสำหรับกิจกรรมวันนี้นะคะเราจะเริ่มด้วยการพูดถึงที่มาที่ไปนะคะโดยงานนี้จะเกิดขึ้นไม่ได้เลยถ้าไม่มีร่วมจัดการก่อนนะคะก็ประกอบไปด้วยThere are 5 co-organizing organizations: Project SEVANA South-East Asia, the Environmental Journalism Network Association, and UTO, as well as Focus on the Global South. The last is Thai PBS broadcasting station. They will be here all through the 3 days. I believe that the issues of environment, democracy, and livelihood in the region will be relevant to the situations in this region at the moment, particularly in the environment and democracy. How are these 2 concepts related? We will be sharing experiences from our networks and organizations all through Southeast Asia. And today we will start with the background to how this comes about. This is the 2nd year that we organize this Mekong ASEAN Environmental Week. So how did we start? It will be explained to you. Then later on there will be speakers on looking back in the last decade on the issues of environment, democracy, and livelihood in the ASEAN region. This will be moderated by Premrudee Daoroung from Project SEVANA South-East Asia. So, looking back at the environment, democracy, and livelihood issues in the Mekong region. The speakers include Neth Dano, Director of ETC Group, the Philippines, Dr. Saing Koma, who founded this Cambodian Center for Studies and Development of Agriculture, who received the Magsaysay Award, and he will be speaking, the second person to be speaking. The third person is Kun Tenchom Satang, Director of Earth Organization in Thailand. The last person is Kun Thara Buakamsi from Greenpeace Thailand. All the four speakers will be looking at the last decades on the issues of environment, democracy, and livelihoods. These will be the themes of the first day of this Mekong ASEAN Environmental Week. In the next 2 years, so we will be discussing how things have occurred and how people have been affected by the environmental issues as well as politics and governments. As we all know that we are facing the climate crisis at the moment, and you can see that the climate is actually becoming more violent, and every country is being affected. China is being under the cyclone flooding. So before we have once had a seminar on stop damming the Mekong River. We knew that there were plans to build 13 dams on the mainstream Mekong. The Mekong River is an international river, and for sure this is an international river. The policies of all the countries in the region are involved in how we can use the river, live on the river together in the future. For those who are not here, you can still come in person, but as well as watch us on Facebook 2020 MAEW and also on Thai PBS channel. So today, let's get on to the first session of today, that is the background information on the organizing of the environment, democracy, livelihood, and the regional integration seminar today. So I'd like to invite Kun Premrudee Daoroung. Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Premrudee Daoroung, and I have to thank you all again for participating in our Mekong ASEAN Environmental Week, nicknamed MAEW. So this is the second time we are holding this Environmental Week. And last year, it was held a bit earlier than this year. The co-organizers are very pleased to finally be able to hold this event amidst the difficult situations, as we all know, with all the uncertainties surrounding us. I'd like to take some time to talk about the way our thoughts about this event. As we know, the Southeast Asian region is a very outstanding region in terms of natural resources. And the natural resources that we have in our region form the basis of our cultures in the people who have settled in the region. They all rely on the land, the river, and the forest for thousands of years. What is outstanding is the Cambodian kingdom, the culture that built Angkor Wat was a culture that was related directly to Tonle Sap in Cambodia.
เอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้
If you
จะ
look
แบ่ง
at
ได้
the
เป็นสองส่วนใหญ่ๆ
overview,
ก็คือ
there
ส่วน
are
ที่เป็น
two
แผ่นดิน
parts of
ใหญ่นะคะ
Southeast
เป็นแผ่น
Asia,
ดิน
the mainland
ที่
Southeast
เรียกว่า mainland
Asia
Southeast Asia กับสิ่งที่เป็น
and
ภาคพื้นสมุทร
maritime Southeast Asia.
ซึ่งทั้งสองส่วนนี้มีประเทศ
These
ที่
two
เป็น
parts
อยู่ในสังกัดนี้อย่างละ
have
ครึ่งๆ
half
ส่วน
and
ที่
half of the
ทั้ง
countries
สอง
of
ส่วนรวมกั
Southeast
นแล้ว
Asia.
ทั้งแผ่นดินใหญ่ทั้งส่วนที่เป็นภาคพื้นสมุทรเนี่ยความหลากหลาย
Both parts together constitutes 3/4 of biodiversities in the world. That is the richness of this region. If you look at the mainland Southeast Asia, the Mekong River, the Mekong region actually takes up almost all the area of mainland Asia, 4 countries plus Myanmar. And there are two main rivers in this region, Salween and Mekong. So 60 million people rely on this river. And the Mekong River has also created the area in the lowland that is Tonle Sap. This is the biggest internal lake and well known for fisheries, freshwater fisheries. And the water in Tonle Sap actually comes from the Mekong River. The fish as well. The fish in 70% of the varieties of fish in Tonle Sap comes from the Mekong River. At the same time, you cannot separate the natural resources issues from politics and governments within our own region, as well as politics of the Southeast Asia with other big power and trade partners. If you look back 40, 50 years ago, before the eruption of the Indochina War, the international financial institution, together with the US engineers, proposed a set of dams on the mainstream Mekong. At that time, the US has just built the Hoover Dam, so they recommended building dams on the Mekong River. But before the construction happened, the Indochina War erupted, so that was stopped. But at the same time, with the communist threats happening in the region, so the area of the Mekong have been ravaged by the development, the accelerated development to trying to change the scenario. So then, after the some countries in Southeast Asia became socialist. The, there was an idea to set up the ASEAN Associations of Southeast Asian Nations that is basically based on the 4 or 5 countries that are not socialist in order to try to block the socialist countries. So we have a lot of investment has been carried out during this time. In the last 30 years, our neighboring countries, socialist countries, opened their countries up. And even though they were still under socialist government, but their economies turned to neoliberal. So we are now in the same boat, all of us in the same boat in terms of having to deal with the effects of the economic development with the exploitation of the natural resources in the country. So, of course, the market economy will take up any available areas. So now that is what we cannot ignore is the fact that our region is not the same as 50 years ago. We don't have plenty natural resources to be available for us. We are now facing big problems in terms of climate crisis. But this is a chicken and egg kind of issue because we don't know if climate change actually exacerbated the problems that we have created. Is it because the large projects that had been carried out in the past decades have also contributed to climate change? I just want to cite a very clear example. That is the reports of the Mekong River Commission, which is a regional mechanism about 10 years ago. The Mekong River Commission came out with a research report that is the strategic environmental assessment of hydropower dams on the mainstream Mekong. The proposal to build 12 dams had already started. The MRC came out with this report to assess what the impact would be from all these 12 dams. And they looked at the environment, also the economic effects. Will it help alleviate poverty? Or what would happen physically to the river, like sediments and nutrients in the area, as well as the livelihoods of the people in the area? This report actually showed huge impact. And they proposed 4 options. The first option is not to build any dams on the mainstream. Secondly, to delay the construction for 10 years. In the meantime, to study the possible impacts properly. But the third option is to build gradually. And the fourth option is to go ahead and build all the dams. In this report, it was clear that the most affected country in the short term and long term is Cambodia and Vietnam. So that means the Tonle Sap as well as the Mekong Delta. And this, in the year afterwards, the Lao PDR decided to go ahead with Sayabuli Dam construction and followed by Don Sahong Dam. And now we're having Luang Prabang and another Senakam also being planned. So that means that the MRC report could not deter
the countries on the Mekong to think twice before building the dams, and definitely could not delay the plan made by Lao PDR, and it could not convince the Mekong countries to discuss the issue seriously in order to prevent any harm in the future. So right now what we are facing is the dying Mekong. Some people said it's already dead. And this another of the MRC report actually came out recently about the drying up of the Mekong. That means the Tonle Sap, which is usually receives the water from the Mekong River. The Tonle Sap is drying up. And that is a crisis that is actually predicted by the report 10 years ago, as well in the Mekong Delta. Even though after 10 years after the report, the Mekong country government still ignore the prediction. And Thailand now has just admitted that it has an oversupply of electricity by 40%. But for us from the civil society, we think that's 65% oversupply. But the Thai government continued to buy electricity and sign contracts to buy electricity from the neighboring countries, even though the GDP is actually going negative, which is against the forecast. And it seems that the government believes that the GDP will just keep going up like a rocket. So the question now is, what are we facing at the moment? All that what I have said is not actually to come and blame anybody, any parties, to talk only about problems, but actually our intention, our hope is that we want to showcase the issues of the environment, which we believe is the most important issues that are related to all our livelihoods. We want to present the issues by the people who have worked on the issues for a long time. So we have representatives from civil society organizations, representatives of the people, the villagers, and some artists who are actually we are all thinking about the issues and looking for ways to way out of the problem. And we hope that this space will generate more discussions, more sharing of our issues and solutions. And we hope that Thailand can lead in terms of finding ways out of these problems. So finally, I'd like to thank the co-organizers, Project SEVANA, ETO Watch, focus on the Global South, and Thai PBS, which is a key sponsor for live streaming of the events this year. Thank you very much, everyone, for being interested in our event. Apart from the seminars, we also have short films, all good, very good films, and we have to thank those producers that allow us to show the films here. And also we have to thank the speakers that in other countries that actually have agreed to make the presentation on a video to show us here. And so we hope that this event will prove that even though we are under the COVID-19 pandemic, we still do not lack the intention to work together. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kun Premrudee, Project SEVANA. And actually, Kun Premrudee will have to be moderating the panel discussion on looking back on the environment, democracy, and livelihoods issues in the Mekong region. We have 4 speakers. We have 2 on video from other countries, and 2 Thai speakers will be speaking here too. I think they are all here. So I'd like to invite Kun Thara Buakamsi. So I'd like to invite Kun Thara Buakamsi. Kun Penchom Satang. Is she here? She's on the way, actually. So I'd like to now give the microphone to Kun Premrudee on looking back in decades of the environment, democracy, and livelihoods issues in the regional interconnection. And because of the COVID issue, I'm not sure whether COVID is actually the result of the environmental impact of that. But please, Kun Premrudee. Thank you. May I just wear a mask? I don't need to announce the title of this session, right? Because it's similar to the title of the Mekong ASEAN Environmental Week. As explained, we have 4 speakers. The first 2 speakers are outside the country. The first person is in the Philippines, Kun Neth Dano. Kun Neth Dano has been our friends, and she worked for ETC Group, and which is an old organization. She lives in the Philippines. ETC Group works on changes in the economic changes, but they look at a variety of issues. Particularly current is the digital system that is being used by large corporations. I think Kun Neth Dano will be talking about 25 minutes. And then we'll have the other speakers. Then we could do some exchange, questions and answers. Then Kun Kamo from Cambodia I will introduce the speakers one by one later on. So I like to start with Kun Neth Dano, who will be speaking on the video.
Actually requested to make a presentation on environmental governance, corporate interest, and democracy in Southeast Asia. I'm very happy to provide this contribution to this conference and welcome. Good morning, good day to colleagues. First, when we talk of environmental governance, many people would always ask, what is it? And if we look into the literature of what the definition of environmental governance is, it's quite vague actually. But I did look into some of the definitions offered by the UN Environment Program, and The common thing that always comes up when we talk of environmental governance is it's a process that advocates for sustainable development as a supreme consideration for managing human activities through whole system management involving the government, civil society, and business. When we talk of environmental governance, a part of sustainable development is also involves the issue of good governance, rule of law, and compliance and enforcement. And in most cases, it is not just about discussing policies, but implementing and enforcing and even monitoring the application and implementation of environmental law and regulations. And many of us working across different issues on the environment in the Mekong and Southeast Asia have encountered it as we work on forestry, mining, watershed management, and in my case, on general policies at the global, regional, and national level on the environment and it is also no surprise when we talk of environmental governance, particularly in this region, that there are a number of mechanisms where government, business, and civil society sit down in one table and in one room to discuss the environmental aspects of policies and also processes at the national, regional, and international level. It's also striking that in many cases where mechanisms and processes are laid down for environmental governance, the business and civil society end up in one table. So I give here some examples that I have been particularly involved in at the global level, like the UN Environment Assembly, not just provide seats for businesses in the Environment Assembly, but also provide a separate forum for them, which they call Science Policy Business Forum. And this is really glittering events with high-level personalities, all paid for by business. While we, as civil society, work for public interest, we are non-profit, and we receive grants from foundations, even from government. I'm referring to legitimate environmental civil society, for example. It's not the same as those lobbying for the interest of corporations to sell something. And as I mentioned, for example, it is odd to see Shell sitting as the business representative in a body that is supposed to talk about clean technology to address the needs for climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So it's not the same. And we see this also very concretely in the region, in ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, where ABAC, the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, has been institutionalized for the past almost 20 years, so since 2000, 2003, as a formal body for business industry to provide advice and views from business into the processes of the ASEAN. And there's no similar process in ASEAN that provides an institutional seat for civil society to provide advice to ASEAN. The forum, for example, the ASEAN People Forum or the ASEAN Civil Society Conference that civil society is organizing since 2005, is not even institutionalized in the sense that ASEAN does not recognize it as a permanent body or a permanent process, unlike ABAC or ABAC. We've also seen, of course, a lot of corporate lobby on environment and food issues in Southeast Asia in particular. Many of us working on agriculture are familiar with industry, business and industry associations that serve as official lobby groups, are also recognized by governments such as CAPLA. For a long time that represents them in policy meetings at the national and at the regional level, and more familiar at the level of the region, particularly in Southeast Asia, is of course RMP, the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil Production, which has hundreds of members that represent the different parts of the palm oil industry, from producers all the way to processing and manufacturing. So you have big names, huge names like Nestle, Unilever, Charuet Copapan, CP. On that end of the scale, and also sitting as part of the members of the roundtable are small community enterprises dealing with palm oil. And of course, as you shift into mineral extraction, you have Chamber of Mines, the national level. In the Philippines, for example, one of the most powerful industry lobbies, particularly in the mining sector, of course, the Chamber of Mines, which is the association of all the mining companies operating in the Philippines that will actually pay to represent them in various policy discussions, also indirect lobbying, both formal and informal, with the government and also the media on the issue of mineral policy. And these are examples of how environmental governance operates. And bear in mind, as I said earlier, that environmental governance main goals or topmost agenda is sustainable development. How sustainable development is defined and also interpreted and operationalized depends solely, of course, on how the players the dynamics of the players are actually actualized in reality and how they play out. As we move into the fourth industrial revolution, we also see new players, new industry players that are not commonly associated with the environment or with food and agriculture that are gaining ground in terms of their roles, investment, and also political support. Like in the past 5 years, we've seen companies like Amazon going into food and agriculture. In the same way, Microsoft, the Gates company, have started collaborating with pharmacies and retailers such as Walgreens because of the control over retail. And again, closer to home, like those of us looking into the Belt and Road Initiative would probably know as well that below the radar of the Belt and Road Initiative was the digital Silk Road. And the digital Silk Road, of course, is not just an initiative of the Chinese government state, but also brings forward and brings with it advancing on China's fourth industrial revolution agenda are the big tech companies, the so-called bad tech, that's Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Xiaomi. And there are a number of interesting examples of how big tech and culture and that online games
so
in
ตอนนี้
China
ในเมืองจีนเนี่ยก็มีบริษัทใหญ่ๆอย่างเช่นที่เรียกว่า Big Tech หรือ Big Tech กับ Big Agriculture เกษตรใหญ่กับเทคโนโลยีใหญ่ๆอย่าง Alibaba ในเรื่องของ
organic and sustainably produced pigs and selling them in its own e-commerce platform, which was later absorbed by Alibaba. So the biggest food retailers globally are not just the stores or the supermarkets, but Amazon is included and also JD.com in China, which is the biggest e-commerce company in China, as well as Alibaba, which is slowly but surely expanding.
ก็ขยายเข้าไปครอบคลุมในภาคส่วนต่างๆของเศรษฐกิจอย่างมากขึ้นอย่างที่ในเรื่องของผลประโยชน์ของบริษัทเนี่ยนะก็มีส่วนเกี่ยวข้องอย่างมาก
New technologies like digital and data-driven technology, automation and sensing, molecular engineering, which is not just about biotechnology and engineering, but also combining nanotechnology and using digital technology to be able to do faster, more efficient ช่องหนึ่งค่ะแต่แล้วมันรวมทั้ง fintech
พวกฟินเทคหรือเทคโนโลยีทางการเงินต่างๆด้วยนะที่บริษัทอย่างใช้เทคโนโลยีบล็อกเชนที่จะเป็นตัวควบคุมการค้าขายต่างๆนะนี่คือแนวโน้มที่เป็นความท้าทายอย่างมากในแง่ของความท้าทายที่มาจาก Big Tech แล้วมันยังมีจะไม่ออกลงรายละเอียดมากขึ้นแต่ว่าอย่างที่บอกนะคะมันไม่ใช่เฉพาะ Big Tech เข้าไปเล่นในเรื่องของสิ่งแวดล้อมเรื่องของการเกษตรแต่บริษัทที่มีอยู่เดิมอย่าง Nestle หรือ Unilever หรือ CP เจริญโภคภัณฑ์ก็เข้าไปอยู่ในช่วยกับเขาปฏิวัติปฏิวัติเทคโนโลยีกับเขาด้วยซึ่งก็มีกำลังคุยเรื่องปัญญาประดิษฐ์อยู่โม้ในเรื่องนี้อยู่รวมทั้งการ Internet of Things หรือการควบคุมอุปกรณ์ทุกอย่างด้วยอินเทอร์เน็ตซึ่งมันจะทำให้บริษัทเหล่านี้สามารถที่จะสอดส่องแล้วก็ดูแลในเรื่องของห่วงโซ่อุปทานทั้งหมดและข้อมูลทั้งหมดที่มีอยู่แล้วก็ในช่วงนี้เนี่ยเราจะเห็นเลยในช่วงของการระบาดโควิดว่าบริษัทที่เกี่ยวข้องกับเทคโนโลยีแล้วบริษัทใหญ่ๆนะไบเออร์ซินเจนต้าซึ่งซินเจนต้าตอนนี้เนี่ยเป็นของเจ้าของคือเคนไชน่าหรือบริษัทของจีนซึ่งและ BASF เหมือนกันกำลังมีภาคีไปหุ้นเป็นหุ้นส่วนกับบริษัทที่ควบคุม Big Data ทั้งหมดแล้วรวมทั้งใช้เทคโนโลยีในการที่จะหลายๆอย่างในด้านการเกษตรอย่างเช่นมีการร่วมมือกับบริษัทที่ของจีนที่ผลิตเครื่องโดรนหรือจานบินที่เอาวิ่งไปพ่นยาหรือไปฆ่ายาฆ่าแมลงซึ่งแล้วก็ซินเจนต้าก็เข้าร่วมกับ DJI ซึ่งกำลังผลิตตัวโดรนสำหรับการเกษตรโดยเฉพาะด้วยแล้วนอกจากนั้นก็ยังมีเครื่องแทรกเตอร์ขนาดเล็กสำหรับเกษตรกรรายย่อยเพื่อที่จะช่วยแก้ปัญหาประเด็นแรงงานในภาคเกษตรราคาแพงขึ้นก็หันไปใช้เทคโนโลยีเครื่องจักรกลแทนดังนั้นเราก็จะต้องดูในเรื่องว่านี่คือการปฏิวัติทางด้านเทคโนโลยีที่บอกว่าเป็นปฏิวัติครั้งที่4กำลังมีผลกระทบในเรื่องของการแย่งยึดที่ดินด้วยแล้วเราก็รู้ว่าเกษตรกรรายย่อยก็จะถูกเบียดขับออกไปSo it becomes easier for land grabbers to enter and consolidate farms. And in the context of farm consolidation, the role of big ag, the agricultural companies and food companies are becoming more prominent, and also their partnership with big tech companies that produce autonomous tractors and also drones. And what are the implications of this on democracy in Southeast Asia? It's quite easy to be impressed or even deluded that these technologies would help food security, would actually help farmers in dealing with labor issues and make farm work easier for them. But if we look closely on the implications of these technologies on who needs to benefit from sustainable development, the more we will see that there are big questions on who really benefits from these technologies. Do they really take into account the situation and also the needs of small farmers and marginalized communities? Like ETC has been looking into this, and our conclusion
is that these technologies barely look at the needs of small farms. No, the profit motivation is first and foremost, and it's not even farmers who make the decision, but corporations that are behind the development of these technologies, and in most cases across the region are actually supported by governments that are equally excited about being part of the so-called fourth industrial revolution without asking and who are benefiting. And going back to the question on who really makes the decision, and is this really going to support those who are left behind in the development equation. So looking into the implications of this development, corporate interest, environmental governance, and also the increasing adoption of fourth industrial revolution in the environment sphere, looking at the implications on democracy, it actually bears to mind the equation that I showed earlier in my slides on the role of government, state, business, and civil society. Now, civil society's role is becoming more and more marginalized as the hoopla or the excitement over the fourth industrial revolution gets bigger, and in the other spectrum is that it gives more prominent roles for big agriculture and for big technology in policy and decisions around the environment at the national, regional, and global level. We see this more clearly as we go into examples in the region, like CP or Charawan Pokapan. It's a very good example where you have board of directors or officials that are part of that revolving door between corporations and government, or even the military circle. I was just looking at the profile, for example, of the CEO of CP and the current role of the CEO in government bodies, deciding on education, deciding on policies. Like, is it hard to imagine how people who are selling big tech or big agriculture to be promoting their interest in this government policy? So there's also a lot of ethical issues involved in here as governments become more desperate to bring in business and industry into the policy-making sphere. Also, there are bigger and bigger concerns about the surveillance and implications on people's rights of bringing in big technology in spheres related to agriculture, food, and the environment. The same drones actually take pictures of the farm to map out pests and diseases, and also practices are exactly the same drones that are being used to monitor the activities of environmental defenders, in mining areas or in forest areas, particularly indigenous peoples. Who controls these technologies makes this a very critical issue. Like, who uses these technologies and for what are things that we should interrogate, that they should not be left in the hands of business and not in the hands of the state. And of course, there's a lot of violation of consent and suppression of dissent as a result of this. Like when drones take pictures of a farmer's field, there are actually issues that are coming up in the north, for example, where these drones are used by technology companies in partnership with big agriculture, are actually being used without the consent of smaller farms whose territory, whose area are actually being surveilled for purposes of building big data to help big corporations design better products, quote unquote, that are more custom built to farmers' needs. And in the area of consumers, we talk of democracy. It also, of course, involves to a lot of extent choices. Like, we may have benefited, quote unquote, from the use of e-commerce during the time of the lockdown across the region. some months ago and continuing in some areas up to now. But we have to be very conscious that using e-commerce and also dependence of digital technologies does not come for free. Those of us who have followed, for example, the controversy around Facebook's business model that sells data from its users, free users, to companies that are not just selling things but are selling political platform and also advising and providing consultancies for politicians, are very much aware of this, on how social media information that we provide as users are being used, not just to profit but also to manipulate choices, political choice in many instances, as we've seen in elections in the U.S. and also some elections in the region. Also, when it comes to farmers' rights and indigenous people's rights, dependence on the fourth industrial revolution and bringing this in the sphere of the environment, in particular in the area of minerals, forestry, food production, and agriculture, would tend to marginalize further the knowledge and traditional systems of farmers and indigenous communities that were built across generations. Across communities in the region, these are marginalized and considered not even knowledge, but just local practices. I've been to many discussions where this has been the framing, and we have to continue challenging that much of the food security, much of the environmental conservation, and also responses to in all this excitement over the application of the fourth industrial revolution on the environment sphere. So I think these are some thoughts that I'd like to share, that we could open up discussions on this as we discuss and also shape the future of democracy in Southeast Asia. So I had my discussion there. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Neth. Neth, are you there? Hello, Neth. ก็คุณเนทได้พูดถึงประเด็นหลายประเด็นนะคะซึ่งหลายคนที่พวกเราก็ไม่ได้ติดตามนะคะ Hi Neth. Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation. You have listened to yourself, right, just now. And I understand that you also have another page, I mean the last part of your talk.
I can barely hear.
Yeah, you cannot hear. Can you hear better now?
Yeah, I can hear better now.
Right. Yeah, so I understand that you still have another page as a recommendation, your last slide, that you would like to talk to us. But let me just very quickly ask our audience here if they have a question for you. คุณเนทก็จะมีอีกนิดหน่อยนะคะที่เขาอยากจะเสนอแนะแต่ว่าอยากจะขอให้พวกเราถามก่อนถ้าใครมีคำถามนะคะกับคุณเนทดาโนแล้วก็ให้เขาตอบก่อนแล้วอาจจะให้เขาจบโดยสรุปอันนั้น All right then. So would you like to just continue from what you present, just a little bit more on the conclusion and recommendation, please? Yeah. All right.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, very clear. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Sure. Like I could run through my last slide, which I actually forgot to present during the recording. And these are action points, proposed actions that we as civil society can do to be able to address the challenges that I outlined in my presentation. The first one is the aggressive promotion of the alternatives that we have developed over the years. Among these viable alternatives that have been proven by many studies to work and also to benefit
small-scale farmers, family farms, and smallholders is agroecological practices that are actually built on the knowledge systems of the communities, both indigenous and local communities, who really have to aggressively promote this knowledge systems as viable alternatives. Second, of course, is to build shorter and closer relationship between consumers and producers, to be able to promote models of shorter supply chains. And I think many experiences in Southeast Asia during the lockdown period, the first 3 months of the pandemic, have shown how useful in promoting livelihood, also in advancing consumer-producer linkages, direct linkages. If we have these models of shorter supply chain that actually allows producers to directly supply to consumers. And there are models that Thailand has actually shown on consumer-supported agriculture that have also worked so well during the pandemic. Also, we need to, of course, show that there are other non-technological technological options to be able to address development challenges, rather than being trapped on technological fixed mind in addressing problems like food security, climate change, and environmental challenges. We have to broaden the discussion, that there are innovations that are promoted by communities, social innovation, and also a lot of practices that have been proven to be safe and efficient and appropriate for the needs of, to address the needs of communities work, to broaden the discussion that it's not about technological solutions or technological fixes alone to solve the problems caused by technology. And lastly, there is this important option about interrogating technologies, that we are not just passive recipients of technologies, but we should be active users and consumers to push for participatory and transparent assessment of technologies before they are deployed in communities, assessing and evaluating the potential impacts on the environment, on livelihood and cultures are prerequisites before any technology is deployed, and that choice of deploying and adopting technology should lie in the hands of people. So I'd like to highlight those proposed action points. I'm sure there are many that are that we as a collective can come up with.
Thank you so much, Neth. I'm very sorry we have a very tight schedule, no? So if we don't have any hands here to raise the question, I think we have to move to the next speaker. But yeah, the issue that you gave us have been very important, and of course we should continue discussing on this in the future. But if you have time, please stay with us. No, listen to other speaker. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best to the conference.
ค่ะ
Thank you.
ค่ะ เราตบมือให้คุณเน็ตหน่อยนะคะค่ะ thank you ขออนุญาตต่อเลยนะคะคนที่สองของเราเนี่ยคือยังแสงโกมานะคะคุณโกมานี่ก็เป็นเพื่อนเก่าเช่นกันนะคะเรารู้จัก
Kun Koma, we know each other for 15 years. He's the founder of a very important organization called CEDAC in Cambodia. The CEDAC helped farmers grow crops in small areas so that they can feed themselves. So CEDAC had worked with Cambodian farmers all over the country. And actually, he received the Magsaysay Award from his work with farmers in 2000, what the year? 2014 or 2012. After receiving this award, 2 years ago, Koma decided to join a political party called Grassroots, Grassroots Democratic Party. It's a small party in Cambodia so we invited Koma to talk about this, why he decided to, after his success in working with farmers, to work with a political party. Kun Koma has about 16 minutes presentation. I'm not sure that whether he's online yet. So just please listen to young Saing Koma.
Yeah, hello everyone. I would like to talk to you about my experience from working with NGO to political party, especially how a political party and good policy can solve social problems in Cambodia. I would like to organize my talk in 3 parts. The first part is about the Cambodian context. Second part about my past work with NGO, and the third part, actually the main part, is about my work with the Grassroot Democratic Party. So about the Cambodian context, as you may know that Cambodia is still an agrarian society. We have about 60 million people, and about 70% of our population still small farmer, and they are living in throughout 1,400 villages throughout the country. But there is change. There are more and more diversification of economy, and more people migrate out of the village, especially or mostly young people, to work in the urban area, to work in other sector, and to work in other country, especially in Thailand. And so far I know there's about 1 million migrant workers now in Thailand. About the political system, so since 1993, Cambodia adopted the system of parliamentary democracy. Every 5 years, there are elections, and now we have 125 members of parliament. And since 2002, we also have a local election that people, villagers can elect their local leader, we call a commune council. Concerning my work with NGO, so I started to work with NGO in 1995 after I come back from my study in Germany. So first I worked for the NGOs, but I also involved in teaching, in giving lecture at the university as well. From 1997 to 2015, so I founded the NGO called CEDAC, Cambodian Center for Study and Development in Agriculture. So I was the director and president of CEDAC from 1997 to 2015. So we have been working to support small farmers, 100,000 of small farmers throughout the country to improve their life, to improve agricultural production, to develop farmer organization and networks. But as you know, there are limitations in terms of NGO work, and I myself, I want to help, want to support all farmers in Cambodia. And also to support farmers not only in terms of agriculture, there are more complex issues faced by the farmers and villagers. Issue of health, of education, access to land, political rights, etc. So therefore, I myself with other NGO leader and community leader, we decide together that we want to do something more for Cambodia. So we started a new political party, we call a Grassroot Democratic Party, or in short, GDP. But why and what for? So first, as I mentioned before, we want to scale up our experience to bring up the issue of the grassroots to the national level. We want to ensure genuine grassroots representative at the local and national assembly to influence, to formulate policy and strategy to solve their problem and to contribute to build the nation. And especially, we want to introduce a new political culture in our country. The political culture focus on good policy, focus on competing good policy based on core value of solidarity, justice, non-violence, to promote tolerance to different political views, to promote political empowerment of farmers, of youth, of women, and to normalize politics. Everyone can be good politician. So, in short, to promote good policy, to solve social problems, to promote political empowerment and tolerance to different political views. And we want to develop example of how political party with intra-democracy party, because we think that to build democratic institution at national level, at local level, starting also to build intra-democracy in our own political party. And we want to get opportunity to develop a good example of democratic governance starting from one particular commune. So with GDP, with political party, so we can achieve this. We can get opportunity to do something to present good example on how democratic government can work at party level, at commune level, and then at national level. So we, as a political party, we compete in election. You know, as NGO, we cannot compete in election. So we have competed in 2 elections already. First in 2017, so the local election, the commune election. Our goal is to, as I mentioned before, to get opportunity to lead any commune to build an example of democratic governance. But we were not able to get enough support, but we get support in 3 communes with 5 councillors, but we don't have, in all the 3 communes, we don't have the majority to lead the local government. But our councillors are working very hard to promote new political culture, to introduce policy change at the local level. And we gain a lot of experience. And based on this experience, also we also participate in the national election in 2018, and we prepare ourselves for the next election. So in 2018, we competed in the national election. We put candidates in all provinces of Cambodia, and we are the only political party so far that can bring up good policy, publish political platform, and we publish the Green Book, and there are 125 policy. And we were able to, as I mentioned, to put candidates in our province, to introduce our party to every villages, and also to, especially to promote our policy to the people. Even we were not able to get enough vote, to get our representative in the National Assembly, but it was the first start for us. And we, as I said, we gained experience, and we were able to build our network throughout the country, especially our good policy, slowly well known and accepted by more and more people. And we have been and we continue to face bigger challenge for our work. The first challenge is that, as you may know, that the dominance of the ruling party with political power and resources, and they have a very strong power network from village until national level. There is still accepted belief and mindset that involving politics is very dangerous. You would be killed, you would be arrested, or you would be expelled out of the country. And it's difficult for us to mobilize active citizens to involve in our political work. And we also experienced example like in 2016, one of our co-founder, Dr. Kamlay, was also killed. So, but because of this, because we are committed to continue our journey without fear, and we want to set example of the people that politics is not bad, it's not dangerous. Politics is about doing good things for the society, as I mentioned before, about the new political culture. And another challenge is how to gain trust from citizens as citizens to prove that we are truly independent party. The community people label, follow us, as a party to serve the interest of the ruling party. So we have to prove that we are really independent, that we are a party, have vision, have core value, have policy, as everything in our green book. So, in spite of this challenge, we see a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of hope and confidence in the Cambodian citizen, and we continue, as I said, our journey, and we will compete in the next election in 2022. Keeping in mind that we want to get opportunity to lead the local government at any particular commune, to develop example of democratic governance. And we continue to educate people about our green book, about our core value, about our vision, about our 125 policy, focus on national reconciliation, nation building, and national defense. Focus on the economy and labor sector, focus on the health care sector, education and youth, focus on the social welfare issue, and especially on the democratic governance into public service for every citizen and so on. So, based on our experience in political work with GDP in the last, let's say, 4 to 5 years, we can say that our work, our political party work, can lead to gradual social and political change for the world. And it is not about rushing to grab power for the sake of power, position, and money. We see political change, social change is a process-oriented, and it takes time and patience in introducing new political culture, especially in political empowerment of local leaders throughout the country in all sectors. It can take more than 20 years to lay this kind of good foundation. As our logo with the pyramid, it's a more bottom-up approach to lay a strong foundation at the grassroots level. But we believe that if we have been successful in one commune in developing model of example of democratic governance, the success in one commune can bring more success in thousands of communes and bring the success to the national level. And we are expecting to get opportunity during the next election in 2022 to prove our commitment to build ideal democratic society in any commune of Cambodia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. ขอบคุณคุณโกมาถึงแม้จะ
Thank you, Kun Koma. But to have Kun Yang Saing Koma talking to this event is very special because he is very busy, and he told his members of the parties where he's going to talk, so people can watch. He's chair of the GDP party. So if the GDP will join the election actually in 2018, if the GDP won the election, he would be prime minister. So what he has been telling us is why he left the NGO that he founded. So it was a great courage to jump into the political circle. And many people questions his decision, but Koma was clear that he doesn't want to grab power or actually rush to do that. He wants the people to have space to be able to participate in the change. You have seen the picture of his colleague who was killed. He was a DJ, he works as a DJ, and he was out in one morning at a coffee shop. He was killed, shot, and when the millions of people actually went over to where he was killed to pay respect to him. So even though Koma still says that he doesn't believe that politics is all violent, he believes that it can do good things to the people. So that's an interesting presentation on democracy, the issue of democracy. So we will go to the next two speakers. I would like to invite Kun Thara Buakamsi, so Director of Greenpeace Thailand. Greenpeace is well known in Thailand. So I asked Kun Thara to go first because he will speak about quite broadly about politics and climate justice in the Mekong region. So he'll be the only person talking directly about climate change. So please go ahead. First, thank you, Kun Ieng, for inviting me, and also the teamwork for MAEW. On the environment issue, democracy and livelihoods for this Mekong ASEAN Environmental Week this year, I think very relevant to the situations we are facing today. What I would like to present on climate justice, it's not a new issue. And the word global warming is already well known. So I want the other word, that is the climate crisis instead, because climate crisis is situated in the time, in every time and place we go, in people's mind, in the budget of the government, in the government policies. We every day we talk about how we should change our behaviors. Uh, uh, at the same time, we are experiencing the extremes of climate crisis every day, which brings the problem about the future, what we can see in the future. Uh, so global warming and climate crisis have been actually stripped of political issues, because it comes down to changing your light bulbs to LED, for example, which is a shame. When we talk about climate challenges and about when we already talked, Premrudee talked about the large dams on mainstream Mekong and the policies on forest and eviction of people from the forest and other development projects. For example, the erosion prevention, coastal erosion prevention and issues. I just want to start with, as I said, climate justice is not a new issue. It started with the movements on climate justice, actually started with climate negotiations 20 years ago. At that time, there was the conference of the parties at The Hague, and it was the conference that actually recognized that climate change was the issue of climate change involved rights as well. And then the Johannesburg COP, there was the adoption of the Bali principle. Then later on, in the COP, the Conference of the Parties at Bali, that's where the climate justice movement was born. And we also have the climate justice movement in Thailand. But the most outstanding was the one in Copenhagen. That was when the climate justice movement made the biggest show. I think all of you probably also joined that movement. But we were disappointed with all the civil disobedience and all the demonstrations that we organized and all the slogans about system change, not climate change. But the negotiation actually failed, the official negotiation. So later on, the Bolivia proposed a people's agreement as an alternative to address climate change. Then in Poland a few years ago, later on you could see that younger people joined the Greta Thunberg in protesting. Bali principle is clear, where that climate change is about the people's rights to protect their own livelihoods. It's not about commercializing resources. So then the climate justice movement proposed 6 principles, and these principles still are relevant today, about keeping fossil fuel in the ground, about paying attention to developing countries, and what's important, interesting is that to stop the role of the industries in the negotiation at the negotiation table. So the next slide will show that the climate justice movement has been going accompanying climate litigation. Climate litigation is a bit difficult to see on the slides, but you can see that there are 1,587 cases, lawsuits being filed across the world in 28 countries. But mainly they are in the US. About 3/4 of them are in the US, and the plaintiffs, those that are being sued, are the governments. And at the same time, the investors also filed their own lawsuits to counter lawsuits as well. So we can see. Can I have the next slide? You can see that on the right, in the map on the right, no, the left, sorry, the left. It's the number of laws related to global warming. Every country have several laws. They're called climate change laws, not really related to climate, but it could be for forest and land. And the other map will show where the lawsuits are actually being filed. But you can see that the majority are in the US and Europe. And the two issues about it's a strategic move to file lawsuits in order to push for policy change and to change the policy of the companies, the business operations. So you can see that human rights as actually being cited along in these lawsuits. Now, and an interesting case is about the now that the private companies actually include climate risks in their business models as well. But what is still challenging is that there are not enough evidence to show for climate change that could be used in the lawsuits. So the lawsuits could be strategic to trying to push for transparency and also to upscale the debate at the policy level. But what is challenging still, but we still have to work on it, is that these climate lawsuits takes about 5 to 10 years, and its cost is high. And also you can get counter lawsuits filed by the companies, that is to try to keep us quiet. And this map's not just, it's about Asia, Southeast Asia. Just the map shows, if you look in the details, we have data that in this table that shows the 10 ASEAN countries, not including Timor-Leste. This is about the number of environment or climate-related laws. We've got lots of policies. The number of policies are there, but the cases that are being filed that's related to climate change are very few. There's one in the in Indonesia, two in the Philippines, and and the number of, you can see the last column, if you have, that shows the risks that the Southeast Asian nations face from climate change. This is about all the costs that occurred in the last 2-3 decades. That's in the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia. So the costs and damages of events related to climate change, that means the loss of lives as well as properties and affected people, the number of affected people. These are all the figures have been calculated in terms of millions of baht. But you could see that we still have gaps in terms of the data. What I said earlier, in Indonesia, there was one climate change lawsuit in Bali. When you go to Bali, you will not see this power plant, but this coal-fired power plant is being built there. The local government wanted to expand the power plant, so the villagers sued the Bali municipality, saying that they cannot do it because of climate change. But the court actually dismissed the case for insufficient evidence. So I think only 30% of the lawsuits actually were successful. Another thing that is related to lawsuits on climate change, they are targeted at what we call carbon majors, that are the big players in the carbon field. About 100 companies, large mining companies, and that are responsible for emitting greenhouse gases up to about 71%. So the rest of the emission are just ordinary people. These are really large players. There is one lawsuit being filed that is targeted these large players. One is, apart from fossil fuel industries, there are also related industries like the plastic industries. So it shows that if we target changing people's behaviors, ordinary people's behaviors, instead of actually targeting the key players, it will be a missed opportunity. So just to show the example of what the lawsuit looks like, targeting these carbon majors.
I have to go back. I'm not sure if I'm able to open this. Okay, so it's fine. So in Philippines, there's a human rights committee. In 2015, Greenpeace there worked together with the community and the civil society, hundreds of them working together to file a lawsuit against fossil companies, totaling 47 companies, big companies, because they are playing a big role in the impact in terms of climate change in the Philippines. That leads to typhoon and all the storms. So the Human Rights Committee took the case, and then they opened a forum. They opened the case and investigated uh, in New York and also in England, in London. In London, they have a headquarter of big companies like Shell. I'm not sure if it's Shell, the other one, and in New York as well. But no one came, and so the investigation was being in progress to find whether these 47 companies have a role or influence uh, in terms of creating big negative impacts on the climate change. This investigation started from 2015 until now. So we still didn't get any conclusion on that case. So there was a commissioner, a human rights commissioner, uh, knows that these 47 companies plays a big role, but they didn't conclude it yet because of COVID situation. I believe that in 2 or 3 months from now, we'll see what's gonna happen, and the litigation on carbon major in Philippines will be a good example, an important example that would help with the movement on this issue on Asia and Southeast Asia in general. So please go to the next slide. The other one that I would like to share is that apart from what Kendi has talked about the big projects in the ASEAN region, in the Mekong Basin, we found out outside of China, in this region, Asia, Southeast Asia region, it is a big target place for coal power plant to establish. So this number is more than India, more than Turkey, more than Bangladesh, and more than anywhere else in the world except for China. So there's a big fight on energy sector, on fossil fuels, but this project is concentrated on Indonesia and Vietnam. Thailand is like a secondary place. The neighbor that Thailand's neighbor Laos, we just signed with the Laotian government. They said that it's going to be done in 7 years. It is in one of the provinces in Laos. The investment is done by in Malaysian companies. So because Hong Sa lignite may be of Laos, so now they're planning on the second plant, and the cable would be connected to through Vietnam or maybe to Thailand through Ubon Ratchathani, or it would be connected to Cambodia. So there would be a bit of contradiction because Saigon is a really poor province, but it is connected to the border of Vietnam, and they should have coal sources there. So this is something that is very interesting. So it will lead to what we will discuss in the future, whether we can pursue this climate change lawsuit. And the last issue that I would like to share with you, this one is not consistent with what I said earlier, but when we talk about climate change crisis, first, it has been diminished in the political aspect, in the justice aspect, but the important issue is that many cities in this world is more aware and alert of trying to push this into a policy. For example, in Thailand, we learned that we will have a global warming law, but this law doesn't say anything. It just says that there would have to be data collection, reduction in greenhouse gas. They don't talk about justice aspects or community aspects or They would not address the contradiction about uh, in minor cases, like when the villagers go and look for or collect mushrooms that may be litigated against in that case for global warming, for creating global warming. S- So we have to think about how we can push this into a policy. And I think that uh, it would require the mechanism in the parliament, but maybe we don't have so much hope for that. But we still have to work on the justice aspect of the climate change, uh, so that it is not it's moving from marginalized subjects into something that can be mainstream in the political policies in ASEAN. So I would like to end here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kuntara. So the mission on climate change is very complicated. The other day I heard that someone said that Thailand is surviving this crisis, but actually, um, when we talk about the risk, we cannot actually compete with those in the maritime areas or in the Mekong region area. Thailand, Thai people always think that they are in the safe zone, but it's not true. But as Kuntara has said, many people are following on this matter, including the journalists. I would like to open the floor so that the journalists can ask Kuntara on the issues that he has just talked about earlier. At the back, please go ahead. Please introduce yourself. It'd be better if you do so. My name is Pom Yumat. I'm not a journalist, but I would like to ask Kuntara, because we have political limitations, so much limitations. The movement on this issue, how can we actually do it? One thing that I think from the situation that just happened, I think that we may have to create a movement in terms of like road side politics. It's not like we go protest on the roads, but the process in the parliament will have to continue as usual. Although it seems hopeless, but we should not lose our hope. We may wait for the next round or the next time. But how do we? I think in Thailand's case, I just thought about the lawsuits that the people were sued against. Recently, there was mother that the court said that she encroached on the forest areas. That case, if we work in interconnectedly, we collect the data and find the proper evidence and come up with like an evidence to show that when the forestry department sue them for deforestation is very contradictory, because the 100 companies that emit 70% of the gases in the world, there are actually some Thai companies in there. I would say the name. It's Banpo. It's a big company. They invest in Mongolia and etc. How do we come up with the evidence that shows that the villagers are refrain from the rights of the livelihood is different from the fact that some big companies have influence on the policy and they are actually uh, the main guy who create this impact. So how how do we enhance these cases and make it like a tools for the community to fight and for those who has got impact to fight so that they can work on this issue. A lot of things that happens like mining, mines and fossil fuels and etc. If we can find a good evidence and connections, we can make it a national climate litigation. But the important condition is in what uh, forum or what opportunity can we do this, because we cannot actually rely on the existing system or mechanism. I don't want to talk much about it. But you have to think of the way. What are the ways that we like maybe a human rights forum and etc. to uh, to work on this. I think that to answer your question, we have to do more variety of politics on the road. So it is very correct that we have to talk about democracy and politics. We have about 20 minutes before 12:30, that is. So let's utilize this time. So I'd like to invite Kun Penchom Seatang, the last speaker of this morning. Kun Penchom Seatang, I think you know her well. She works on pollution and industrial uh, factories for a long time. Now, Kun Penchom is the director of Burana Niwed Foundation or Earth. The topic is pollution and cross-border. So the topic would be continuation of Kun Tara. I would like to, please let me remove the mask, otherwise I wouldn't be able to speak. Please go to the next slide. The topic that we were talking about today is on the environment, livelihood, and natural resources. I'd like you to take you back to the history. Actually, the word environment and the importance of humanity. This topic has been raised in the World Forum in 1972, 40 years ago. So at the time, many of you may know about Minamata disease, catastrophe that happened to humanity caused by industry, and there were many Japanese, thousands of Japanese, who died from this disease, which was caused by the chemical fertilizer and petrochemical fertilizer industry. Apart from they took all these patients to the UN conference, the human environment. That is the first time of the history that was raised, that environment was raised. Um, and in the conference in Stockholm in 1972, there were 26 principles. There are action plans that have recommendations on the natural resource environment management and on democracy, and mainly on environment. They talked about how each country should set a standard value of the pollution in the country, a benchmark. So it depends on how each country set their own values. It is the responsibility of the government to protect their own natural resources, and this is the first time that they talked about this after the industrial revolution. uh, Before that, they talked about economic, society, and politics. I mean, before 1972, and after that, after the catastrophe in Japan, after the discovery of Minamata disease in uh, during that time, before the world even know it, it was not until 1972 we talked about how to remedy the damage done to the environment, and the other point is to consider the potential of the environment that can because they could cure themselves and heal themselves. So in this that's the issues discussed in that conference. And in 1992, I think many of you already know it is a conference called the Earth Summit, conducted by UN on environment. It's the biggest one that we had so far until then. Before that, there was never such a big conference. There were many delegates from many countries, and there were discussion on ongoing discussion on the declaration and Agenda 21. Those are important things uh, for us. So for Leo declaration, there are three main principles that says that from now on, the world would move forward, and they would help develop the society, economy, and whatnot. Uh, in order to move forward, they would need three main principles. Otherwise, we would face a lot of disasters. So that is in 1992. So the earth will be able to move forward sustainably, will require people's participation in policy level in terms of policy protection, and the people will need to be able to access information and data for the decision making process in environment process. So these are the three main principles that is very ideal, and to in order to turn it into the action plan, we have to see the Agenda 21, and that will talk in detail that each government will have to take these three principle in the Leo Declaration and the action plan by UN to be a guiding principle for the practices. And there's a evaluation that uh, there were review on this issue in 1997 on Earth Summit Plus 5, and the review shows that principles are principle, plans are plans, there is no progress. This is something that raise people's awareness and questions that why these three main principles are not actually creating any positive impacts, or Agenda 21, it is just like a Bible of the developers, right? It is the like a Bible for to and a Bible for principle of guidelines, but why are there no progress on environment, and there's no participation from the people side as well? So, and the overall environmental situation is worse, and some countries may have better situation, but the overall picture is worse. So we have gone through this process. But one of the things that started um, when we look at the conclusion of Summit Plus 5, we see that there were discussions on the fact that when we discuss about the environment, it has to go together with economic development, because in other words, environment cannot affect uh, the economic development. So the resolution, there was something added to the resolutions of the UN that we have to give importance to the environment, and we have to add this environmental issue to trade liberalization. Trade liberalization started in 1977, and which says that from now on global trade will be free, and with the condition that every country that have the FTA will have to protect the environment. When we listen to it, it sounds good, but in reality, it's a different story. After they assess that the progress there is no progress. So they connect the environmental issue with trade, and they would have to also destroy all the trade barriers as well. And in 2012, there were UN conference as well. It's called Leo Plus 20, and as Kuntara said earlier, it was on global impact of global warming that has that uh, and we have another thing called green economy. We hear about it a lot, especially nowadays. It's like green economy or eco industry or something like that. But let's look at the reality of what it has happened. In 2012, it was a year that they laid a foundation and framework of how we can set the goals for sustainable development. In 2012 is the year of foundation and framework, and in 2019 they announced 19 SDGs. There are 100 objectives, and there were action plans for 2030. This is the overall picture of what has been in the UN conference, and many governments accepted it. And please move on to the next slide. Apart from, please go on the next slide. Apart from the UN conference, there were many conventions that was being created. Each time, each of the UN conference, there were discussion and leads to the convention about between countries. Basel Convention is the first one that relates to environmental issues. Basel actually originated before Earth Summit because the developing countries like Latin America cannot stand the fact that America carried over hazardous waste and dump it in their countries. And also like Latin America and Africa combine their forces together and fight with those industrial countries. But the Basel Convention has limitations, which I will not go into detail. Um, Next, we have UNFCCC, as Kuntana has talked about a bit already, and then we have Kyoto Protocol, which was done on 2005. As we all know that Thailand, USA didn't ratify this, and then we have Stockholm uh, Convention. It was developed in 2001 and was effective in 2004. Stockholm Convention has another part of importance. Uh, so they try to reduce downs in substance and some substances. It is very important for to control each country to emit these substances into the environment, because they can flow from one country to another country. Um, so I forgot another one, Minamata Convention on Mercury substance. From what happened in 1956, there came Minamata Convention. They want to control the transmission of mercury in the industry, and petroleum company also released this mercury into the environment. Actually, the mercury that is being released from the coal power plant can be flow through to other countries, because it can travel like that. And so this may not be in Thailand, but it doesn't mean that we are safe from it. Our team has collected information and see the levels in Chantaburi. We collected some fish in the top of the mountain, because that is like a pure water. And but we found that there was a really high amount of the substance in Chantaburi. and we cannot answer why we find such a high value of mercury in Chantaburi fish, but I understand that the mercury can travel through the air. So this is one of the findings that we found, uh, that even if you are not an industrial city, it's not like you're safe because they can travel through the air. I would like to go back when the when many people ratify the principles. What happened after that? Many principles are for people and countries to comply so that the world can be more secure and sustainable. But you can observe that in 1972 to 1992, there were no sustainable consumption or production plan. So for these country, there's no sustainable plan, and what their current practice is still destroy the environment, and that was they don't have enough tools and natural resources to help protect the natural resources. So the format of environmental di- advantage taking was worse. From what we see is that first, the export of dirty investment. For example, Thailand, we receive a lot of this. Some Thailand, some sometimes Thai countries move to Myanmar, but some area in Thailand do the upstream industry that cause toxic to the environment. This is what happened, and the second part is that to create double standards for information giving. For example, America, Germany, Japan, they have the laws that people can access pollution data. We have done we have asked for this information before in Thailand from Rayong, but we never got this information because Thailand never had this law before. For Japanese or Europeans to get, because the Japanese and Europeans have this law, so they can get this information, but Thailand doesn't have this law, so we are not able to access this information. But the 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 last one is sending recycle waste to the developing countries. So these waste could is treated as a type of product. Please go to the next one. Next slide, please. And this is the example, one of the examples. You can see that this map shows the industries that exports waste to recycle. You can see that there are there are many waste from Australia, America to China. They export all kind of waste to China. That's before China has announced the prohibition of importing of waste. Please go ahead to next slide. This is the study from one of the agency under the Ministry of Industry of Japan, and you'll see that if you see this, there would be like a circular area here. So this points out how China would be important in terms of receiving waste from Japan and other countries to recycle, and other ASEAN countries also play an important role in this. And this is the study report of Interpol that was released in August this year. And from the fact that China closed their country and have the law to prohibition of import of waste to recycle or dispose in China, there was an influx of waste into Thailand and other countries in ASEAN regions. You can see that the red circle are the countries that import waste after China prohibits the import of waste. You can see that they changed to ASEAN and Australia and America and Europe and Japan. They used they used to export to China, but now they changed to Southeast Asia. And this is another slide that Interpol has done. Waste trade example plastic, electronic, and plastic, electronic waste, and etc. In the ASEAN region itself, there is a circulation of this waste as well. If you can see the red circle and the gray circle, that's the intercontinental movement of the waste, but the target is ASEAN in Southeast Asia region. And so Interpol has worked on this because they discovered that there are some crime and illegal acts that relates to import and exporting plastic waste and electronics waste. So they have 257 routes of these trade routes, and the main countries are in the Southeast Asia regions, and the export there are about 57 countries who are the exporter of these waste. This is the new type of crime that is coming in, becoming a trend. And this is the conclusion of the Interpol that work together with 40 countries. So this data is based on 39 countries. This is from our study from that year. We conclude the importation of plastic waste from overseas. We actually have done more than 100 items, but this picture is only showing plastic. But Thailand import plastic from over 80 countries. Japan, Hong Kong, America sent waste to Thailand. In 5 years' time, they export 900,000 plus tons. Actually, in China and Hong Kong, they stop prohibits the importation, but actually there is some transit going on there and being sent here in Thailand. Please go on to the next slide. You will see that the peak there, when this is the real impact that was caused by the prohibition of import of waste in China, because before that you can see that the imports before that the importation of plastic waste in Thailand is not that much. It's about 30 to 70 thousand tons. But when China prohibits the importation, it went up to 550,000 tons, and then it went down because there were complaints. There were a lot of reports from the journalists, and therefore the government set up the working force and do a study so that they can stop importation of plastic waste from other countries. And this is something that me and Kuntara has been campaigning about. And this is a picture of the community that come out and protest the recycling of waste in China. And China, they moved the country. Many factories in Thailand moved to Thailand and to the neighboring countries. And in the Mao's country, Thailand is the main target. And this is the factory in Chonburi. So this is another case. Please go to the next slide. I will go fast. And the waste that we got from plastic, from electronic waste, etc., it would be landfilled in Chonburi. We found 6 spots. we have seen it in the area of 4 rice, 16 rice. Samut Songkhram people bought this land and was trying to prepare the land for plantation, but actually this guy got sued because according to law the owner of the uh, hazardous waste is the culprit, so he got sued, but actually it's not his waste. So this is the case that we want to litigate within this month. I'm not sure if the case will be prepared in time. And this is the recycling of industrial waste. Actually, it damaged many rubber plantations, and from what you see, it cannot be recovered. So we ha we have to actually it actually never happened. The fact that we said that we will have to let the environment heal itself and etc. Actually, UN is the main person who doesn't really care about others, because we went to Copenhagen asking for data, but we cannot get access to that information. We get blocked all the time. Under democracy, it is something that is really fake for us, that they work on environment. What is justice? What is in what is equality? The, so let me move on to the next, the last slide. Okay, it's not last yet. Um, Participation, justice, and access to justice system. This is what happens in two, 5 years ago. So the people oppose the public hearing. This is what we actually happen in the community level. This is what really happened in the community, and it actually stays all the time. So the principles in Leo Declaration, the principle of green economy, and etc. Whatever happens in the U.S. UN conference and then the governments, or these are these are not fair. So this is the reality that happened. There are 40, 50 men who went and attacked like women in the area. This is the same area as that I showed you earlier. So this is the last slide. I'm trying to come up with recommendation and solutions. I cannot really come up with the solutions or the recommendations. Kuntara has already recommend that the people should participate in politics more. Um, Actually, the community cannot stop fighting. This is the reality that we face for the past 20 years. We know that this crisis is unstoppable. Whenever the community is in despair and cannot fight anymore, the environment will be damaged right away. So each area, each person, or each community will have to come up and fight to protect their own livelihood and their environment. That is a real sustainable development. Without these people in the community, what do you think people will go to when COVID happened? They would have nowhere to go to. In 1997, in the Tom Yam Goong crisis or the previous crisis, when they don't have anywhere to go back to, they can go back to their hometown in the rural area. That is something that can help support them in the hardship. But when we go back to environment and natural resources, everyone will have to start looking and taking care of this matter. Thank you, Kun Penchom. This is a very important topic. I would not have to uh, conclude because she showed us to see the fakeness of the policy compared to what actually happened in the community. But actually, it's 12:30 now. But I think you have some questions, so please go ahead. Please introduce yourself. Hi, Tana from Bangkok Post. I would like to ask the two speakers, do I understand it correctly that the uh, the, the decay of environments shows the weakness of in the democracy? Is that why Kuntara recommend that we have to find to go on to street politics? Do I understand it correctly? That is directly related. So shortly answering you, I think that is an equation that is connecting to each other. Like Kun Penchop has talked about the procedures uh, on environmental globalization, what Thailand's have on in terms of policy or laws or mechanisms, but uh, when there was political change and the power was centralized, we have the elite in Thailand, which is ONEP and Ministry of Natural Resource and Environment. And as Kun Penchop has said, they talk about all these wonderful things, sustainable development and whatnot, but you know, on the trans-border pollution and etc. I think that these are connected to 1% of the people who dominate a good number of natural resources. So the policy that comes out would be corresponding to that. The degradation of the environment is the result of the policy decision that came up. I'm not sure if it's the weakness of democracy or not, but the capitalists are stronger and they'll be more complicated. For example, if you say that if Thailand has more a regulation on public hearing and etc., but in the reality, uh, the politicians and capitalists are really close, very close. So they will think of ways. These two people, they will have to think how to twist the law, how to evade the laws, because they write their own laws. They write it so nicely, but actually, in practice, they just evaded it. Uh, the community fights until they got the human rights commissioner and etc. But we have one set of commission, and after that we will be undermined and then uh, dismissed in the future. If we fight a lot, they will think a lot, they will be smarter, and then they can destroy this mechanism. They can. I have to admit that it had really damaged it, because these days I don't care about having um, a, a free organization or a voluntary organization. So because it doesn't help with uh, the income equality on global warming, as Kuntara have said. Why are there no cases in Thailand? Because actually Thailand has global warming cases, but it's the case where the community gets litigated. It's very bad because Thailand is the place where like community can get attacked or litigated. If the people in the village burn something, they get arrested. But the actual industrial plants, they never get fined or arrested. But if it's the villager or general people, they would be fined thousands of baht, which is very, very severe. So I don't know if it's the weakness of democracy or if it's the smartness of the government and the capitalists and the community is just going down. So I don't see where we can stop fighting actually. Next. So the democracy contains of three parts, right? The justice, administrative, and legislative, right? And if it's weak, if Thailand is weak, we have to try to push this mechanism and make it more stronger. So I mean, these three parts: legislative, administrative. We all know that how the legislative part is, how the parliaments are. So for the justice part, I'm very very angry. We are uh, uh, we were appointed to I'm appointed to be the specialist evidence uh, against the better working company. I did everything, I fought everything because it happened 10 years ago already. Going back to the documents and proving that this factory actually damaged the environment is really hard to do because I have to do everything. Until one point I got all the documents and I proposed to the court that we have to go to the area and prove it too, because pollution subject is hard in 2 or 3 years time. It's hard to prove already. So I told the court that we have to go to the factory to prove, and I know that they took the public area. We took the court there, and um, the court is very careful to talk to us or to the community, but they're never careful when they talk to the companies. But in the end, I was dismissed because with the reason that I took the side of the villagers too much, because the court said that they do not want my name as a witness anymore, because me as a witness, I took the side of the villagers too much. But because I'm related to many environmental lawsuits and stuff, we know that the mindset of the court of the judges have problems. They do not view the community as equal. They view the community as something that is so demanding. If they want, if they grant something, they want something else or something else. And so the I see that many former government official who retired and or early retired became the advisor of these companies, and we have to fight with them. This is the reality. We have talked to lawyers that we would have to do the work more proactively. We may have to ask to meet the president of the Supreme Court so that they can actually educate the personnel in the justice side, especially on the pollutions or on hazardous substances, because this is not something that can be easily proved. Um, so the justice side is not different than other two parts. We cannot rely on them. We cannot depend on them. Um, so our discussion has become very heated. So thank you, Kun Pen Chom, to end our morning session. And we get all these wonderful thoughts when we talk about the pollution in the country. It is quite interesting to follow up. I think that everyone in our team would have to take our lunch because we have 1 hour break. But I'd like to take 1 minute for Kun Sukanya to advertise the afternoon program. Thank you for the speakers in the morning session. Please give them big hands. In the afternoon, after we talked, we listened to the overview of the democracy and environment. There would be tomorrow in the afternoon we will have a panel uh, discussion of the environmental journalists, and then we would have a documentary on environment. We'll be back here again on 1:30, and For the first one is on sharing experience of environmental journalists and moderated by Kun Udom Ket and there would be other four panelists, Kun Anjali from Bangkok Post, and we'll be back on at 1:30, and then they would have another panelist discussion panel. Uh, we would meet the artists who photographed all these photos, and we will end with playing documentary and short clip. Thank you for the morning session. We'll meet again at 1:30. Thank you. I understand that the I know that some people have to leave, so I'd like you to fill in the survey uh, questionnaire in the front. It's an online questionnaire. Please scan